What's the ultimate secret to unlocking your financial future through investments? How do we deal with discrimination in housing? We're here with Develle Morrison, who is going to share all of her intel.
Thanks so much for having me, Lee. This is awesome.
Well, you are awesome.
Thank you.
I'm really appreciative of you joining me today because you bring so much to the table. I love our conversations. You are always so on point.
Thank you.
And you are someone who, look at things in such a practical, pragmatic way with context.
Right.
I think that's really important.
Cool.
Right?
No, that's good.
So where do you want to start?
It's funny because every time we chat, we usually chat about politics.
I know we do talk about politics.
And it's so funny because I was like, we're going to talk about real estate. But then I was just thinking about the conversation that we just had here at work where, our colleague she didn't really want to be upset about the mansion tax, as we call it.
Yes, the mansion
because
tax.
it affects, people with homes over $3 million. And she was kind of like, cry me a river. I don't care about those people.
Yes.
But what was interesting was then when I pointed out that they're also talking about making a new sales tax in Toronto, and I was telling her that will affect her, all of a sudden she's like, what?
Yes.
So, I think it's interesting with politics. People don't get interested until it affects them personally.
It's always the way,
yeah,
right? Like, how does this impact me and why should I care? Oh, you want to tax someone else? Great.
Yeah.
But you want to tax me? Wait, what are you talking about, right?
Exactly.
So, I love our conversations always because we do really have great, conversation will go tete-a-tete and we just go like, what about this? What about this? Where we're really kind of like, how does this impact other people? And do a 360 on all of the potential repercussions, right? Or
exactly.
what does that lead to?
And I always think about that in terms of let's follow the breadcrumbs. So I do a weekly radio show on AM 640 every Saturday morning at 7:30. And, we talk about,
listen to it.
and we talk about different ideas that different politicians come up with. So we were talking about the mayoral debates and things that people were saying. And, I always say to the host on AM 640, I said, okay, so let's follow the breadcrumbs. If someone says this, where does that lead us? And so, again, if we look at, let's look at the sales tax that might come up, and hopefully it doesn't. But I think that's if you follow the breadcrumbs, that's going to make a lot of people want to leave Toronto. Because they're going to say, you know what, I don't want to pay this money. And I think what's really interesting with the pandemic is it's basically taught people that they can work from home and work anywhere.
Yes.
I was doing, for my podcast, I was interviewing a guy who he was working in a Toyota plant in Cambridge when the pandemic hit. And because of the pandemic, he had to stop, sit, and think and spend time with his family. And he just had this awakening moment where he decided to just change everything in his life.
Okay.
And he decided to go down to the Dominican Republic and he became a real estate agent down in the Dominican. And now he says, he can contact his wife and they just meet for lunch and it's beautiful. So, if we talk about the sales tax that may or may not happen, we don't know. Council has approved it. It now needs to go to Doug Ford for him to approve or not approve of Toronto to have this additional sales tax. So, that's going to affect people. That's going to affect people's bottom line. And, people are willing to change their lives at this point because we've gone through something like the pandemic. So if you have the sales tax, you start to drive more and more people out of Toronto, people who realize they can work from anywhere.
Yeah.
I was recently doing my own podcast interview and I was interviewing this guy who had worked in a Toyota plant in Cambridge during the pandemic. Pandemic happens, everything stops, he's sent home. And now all of a sudden he's spending time with his wife, he's spending time with his son, and he's just sort of realizing that there's a whole other life because he really wasn't seeing them that often because he said he was working 6-7 days a week at the plant. And so he basically decides to completely change his life. And they went to the Dominican Republic. He's now a real estate agent in the Dominican Republic. And he said he loves being able to call his wife to say, hey, just meet me for lunch down the road. And they get to do that. And those are things that they couldn't do before. And I just think that there's so many people who have changed their lives because of the pandemic. And I know that there's a lot of negativity out there about the lockdowns, but I think it gave people pause. It gave everybody this time to think and rethink about, what are you doing with your life? Where are you spending your time? And of course, not even right after the pandemic, but all of a sudden we saw real estate sales do this.
Yes.
Because everybody now needed a place to work from home. They needed a place for their kids to work from home and go to school from home. Everyone now wants to work out from home. So I think it's really changed real estate, even for that matter, because now you've got people looking for more space. We never used to stage people's homes, condos, or houses with a desk so they could work from home.
Yeah.
And now everything is staged with the idea of, this is where you can work. I mean, I remember showing houses before the pandemic, and I would say to people, oh, you can have your desk here. And people would be like, I don't need that. I'm going to work from the office.
Yeah.
And now it's like an automatic thing that you have to illustrate to your clients. Where are you going to put your desk?
Yeah.
Where can you work from? And so I think that that's a really interesting shift with real estate now, that it's about, where can you work from home? And I own a number of vacation rentals as well too. And it's even impacted the vacation rental business. I run an association in Prince Edward County for people who own Airbnb rentals.
Yeah.
And we ran a conference last year, and we had the representative from Airbnb come and speak at the conference. And she's going through the stats of what they're seeing that's different, that's shifting. And of course, one of the things she's seeing is everybody is going on vacation for whatever 2-3 days, but they're making their vacation a little bit longer, and there better be a desk there because they need to work from there while they're on vacation. So it's a real interesting shift that I've seen with this whole workspace needs to be on their vacation, and it needs to be in their home. And another example, my friends and I, we bought a place in Barbados a couple of years ago. And I literally just had one of the guests email to say, how strong is your Wi-Fi? I'm going to need to work from there. And I had to assure them, don't worry about it. My colleague and I, we both did Zoom calls while we were down there, while we were working. Wi-Fi is perfect. But yeah, it's a huge change.
No, and I think that's a really valid and important point, because contextually the world has changed and we have to change with it. Mm-hmm. You've just mentioned, the properties investment properties you own in Prince Edward County as well as in Barbados, and how that has shifted the way you market your property and the amenities that need to be a part of it, right? Like strong Wi-Fi, high speed, right?
Yeah.
Here's an extra monitor so that you can just plug and play.
Yeah.
Right. And I think a part of this conversation I know a lot of people are going to be interested in is, how do I create a future that I want?
Yeah.
Right. And I know that you have always been a part of joining real estate was your investment lens and hat that you would wear, and you've grown that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, before I became an agent, I've been an agent now for about 11 years, but before I was an agent, I was buying investment properties and renting them out. It's just sort of that aha moment where you realize, I don't have a pension, and how am I going to pay for my retirement? And I remember in 2008 when the stock market crashed, and I thought to myself, could you imagine being 80 or 90 right now? And all of a sudden, all of your net worth crashes simply because the stock market went down.
Yeah.
And I just thought, that's not good. Need to have a better plan than that. And that's when I thought, I need to really double down on the real estate investing, simply because that way, at least when I'm 70 or 80,
sell off a property.
Yeah, I've got rental income coming in, or if I don't feel like being a landlord anymore, at least I've got properties to sell. But it just gives me options. And I think that that's what you want as you grow old. You want options. Yeah. You want to be able to, great, if I've got a rental income, perfect. Or maybe I don't want to be bothered and I can sell it and have that cash in my pocket. So, now my new lens about the whole retiring thing, which is one of the reasons why I bought the place in Barbados, is I like the idea. And I should say I'm buying them with friends simply because I don't have an unlimited pocketbook.
Yeah.
And so this way it makes it more affordable because I can buy properties with friends. And so my new thinking is, great, while I'm a little bit younger, buy the properties with the friends now. The properties make money. And by the time I'm ready to retire 20 years from now, the properties are fully paid off and they earn their own income. So now when I retire, I can go spend a month in Barbados. I could maybe spend a month in Prince Edward County. I can hang out in Toronto. So now I'm actually just thinking, okay, what other places
Do you want to live?
Yeah, do I want to live so I can spend a month in Barbados? Maybe I'm spending a month in France. I don't know where that is, where I'm going to go. But the idea is like, great, I could have all these properties that literally earn their own income while I'm retired, and I have a great place to visit, and I've got friends to hang out with while I do it, because we've bought this place together, which I think is great, because then you ensure that your retirement, you're not going to be by yourself. You're going to have people to hang out with.
Well, I love that lens. And I also really appreciate that, because for me also, that's how I got into investment, right? My parents are immigrants and did not have jobs that gave defined pensions. And I was like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, and in my experience as a realtor, many people who are landlords are not corporations.
Mm-hmm.
They're people who, this is my first place, I got married, and so we're going to keep this, and that becomes their future investment,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And so I think that's something that's really important. And I love how you have taken it to the next level of, okay, now I've got the investment property, mortgage is being paid. Where do I want to spend my time?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So I love that, like, as the next level. And I would love to ask you, like, how does one get started? I think a lot of people might be interested, like, oh my goodness, interest rates. We all know interest rates are very high right now.
Yes, they
and
are.
People who are paying rent are probably paying such a high number in rent that they might not be able to save as much. But you've actually kind of given us a little bit of a breadcrumb of work with someone.
Yeah,
like
absolutely,
a friend
for sure.
or something that you trust.
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny because now I've been meeting with a couple of clients who say that do have some money saved. They want to become investors. And so they're saying to me, okay, well, can I continue renting and then can I buy a condo and rent it out? And I'm like, you could, but it's not going to cash flow positive. So, after all their expenses, their mortgage, their property taxes, by the time whatever rent they make, they'll probably be underwater at least $500 or $700 a month. So, and then they're still paying their rent on top of it. So I've said to a couple of clients, how about this? Why don't you buy a house that has rental income within it? So get a house with a basement apartment or buy that duplex so that you've got 2 floors and the renter's got 2 floors. And that's a great place to start, because that's basically how I started thinking of how can I start. When I first started, I thought, you know what? I need rental income. I mean, the fact that my basement apartment now almost pays for my mortgage in my house is phenomenal. And that's just simply because basement rents have gone like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane out there. And I'm very lucky that I bought my house 15 years ago. And so I understand that people out there who, don't have that advantage are, upset about that. But I do think that you really do buy with a friend, buy that duplex so that you've got 2 units and 1 unit to live in and they've got another unit to live in. Just because you're going to buy with someone doesn't mean that you actually have to live together.
Right. It's thinking outside of the box of what makes your lifestyle work.
Exactly. And have that space so that way you can build up some equity for the next property. So I think it's about thinking about starting small first, or, maybe you're renting out a room in your house or your condo. If you really don't have any capital, but that's just sort of the way to start earning more money. You kind of got to use what you've got, really.
Yeah, no. And I mean, even one of our colleagues, Anya, who pointed out about someone trying to rent a closet out for $900, right? I mean, this is a conundrum. This is certainly something that is concerning for people who are on the tenant side of how do we survive and how do we make things work. But it's do the best that you can to pair up with a friend, and figure out how do we maximize our dollars as much as possible. So tell, like everything that you say is really accurate and on point. Right now in this time period, do you think, what are some of the challenges that you see?
I would say that people hate each other.
Okay. Yeah.
Honestly, I would say that humanity has really lost something. People don't care about one another. And I think that that's a huge problem. So just on a micro level, I'll have people who block my driveway with their car because they need to run out and get a cookie. And so when I come out of my house and I question them as to why they're blocking the driveway, they're sort of yelling at me like I'm in the wrong. And I'm like, all you needed to do is literally move your car up a few feet. And you would not be blocking my driveway. You'd still be parked illegally, but you wouldn't be blocking my driveway. but they don't care.
Yeah.
And it's not just them. I just feel like in general, we sort of lost our sense of caring about other people,
Yeah.
and kind of giving a shit about what somebody else is going through in their lives. Right. And just kind of looking over your back saying, hey, you know what? If I do this, it's going to make life harder for somebody else. But if I do this, I can still get what I need. And I have not made life harder for somebody else. And so
how do we support that of being a little bit more kinder?
Well, I think we got to start with yourself, right?
Yeah.
That's how it all starts, right? It's if you want change, you got to start within and be nicer to the people around you. So that hopefully whatever stranger you helped out feels good about it, helping out the next stranger. So I think that's how we start off. But yeah, I just feel like we've sort of lost our humanity that way. And, it's interesting to me. So in the Black community in Toronto, if you walk down a street and you see somebody else who's Black, you sort of nod. You smile at each other, you nod, and it's just sort of a way of saying, hey, I see you.
Yeah.
And, and if you go to a small town, you get that regardless of what you look like.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we need to take Toronto and turn it into the tiniest small town, and have everybody just walk by each other, look at each other in the eyes and be like,
hi,
hey, I see you. Good morning. How are you? And, there's different pockets of that in the city. So I'm a runner. I run on the Beltline. So if you run on the Beltline in the morning, all the runners are like, morning, morning.
Yeah.
You don't say good morning to the dog walkers or the walkers.
How
You only say morning to the runners.
Okay, that's your people. We're runners, right?
So it is kind of funny that there are these little groups, but if we could turn those little groups into something bigger across the city and everybody could look at each other and be like, hey, I see you.
Yeah.
Because that's really what it's about. We have to see each other.
Well, I really think that's interesting that you point that out, because you and I have worked together for Ontario Real Estate Association's first presidential advisory group, of which you were the chair, about diversity and inclusion, because we recognize that there are challenges in housing.
Absolutely.
And I think the work that we were doing there, trying to tackle, how do we deal with discrimination? How do we deal with unconscious bias and those things, and really setting up a stage to have a conversation that says, like, it's not acceptable to discriminate.
Right.
I'm going to turn over to you in terms of your thoughts about the work that we did there.
Yeah. The work that we did there is great, but it's really interesting to see how difficult the work is. It's not like hey, let's, snap our fingers and the problem is gone. Yeah. It is okay, do the research, figure out what people think, and then you've got to figure out how do you solve it, right? So let's talk about discrimination in the rental market, because that's something that's huge. There's a whole Facebook group called Renting While Black. And it's just basically Black people saying, yep, I, had my great credit score. I've got my great job. I'm making tons of money and I still can't get a decent rental in Toronto. And so this is a legitimate thing. And so we look at, okay, so why is that happening? And so then we have to go back to, okay, we've got these very, very restrictive landlord-tenant board rules.
Yes.
And so we've got to reopen that Residential Tenancies Act.
Yes.
And work with the landlord-tenant board to make it a lot more fair for landlords. Because if you make it more fair for landlords, they won't discriminate as much.
I agree.
And so, it's too easy to sit around and point the finger, these landlords are bad. They're just all discriminatory. But the challenge is, the reason why they're being that way is because the Residential Tenancies Act is so strict that if they need to kick out a tenant, it's so difficult for them. So it really forces them to be very, very particular and racist, quite frankly, when it comes to looking out for tenants out there. So, some of the solutions that we chatted with on that committee, are complex. How do you open up the Residential Tenancies Act? Sure, you lobby the provincial government, but they're not going to get votes by doing that. Yeah. And so therefore they won't do it. Yeah. And then that's a whole other issue with politicians. They're only there for 4 years and they only care about something that they can change in that 4 years. They don't care about anything long-term, unfortunately, right? If they did, the Eglinton LRT wouldn't be where it is right now.
Right.
Sorry for that segue.
Well, that's a real thing, right? Like, a lot of people have their lives upset. Businesses have gone under because this thing that was supposed to take 4 years has taken 10 plus. I don't know how long it'll take, but it's been a huge burden on the people who live in the communities and has impacted traffic flow.
Yes.
Life. people's like businesses and
Right.
so,
Absolutely. Like there's businesses who've had to move. There's businesses that have had to close down. And we don't even know when this Eglinton LRT is going to get built. And, I think it's really sad that, in that overall picture, okay, you've not ruined, but I do live at Yonge and Eglinton, so I am biased about this. But, every time I go to Yonge and Eglinton across the street, I have to figure out which way am I crossing the street this time because they keep moving the barricades with their construction, right?
Yeah.
It's annoying. I believe last time I heard there was something like 260 deficiencies when they came up with, why isn't this Eglinton LRT running yet? Yet, with all of that going on, they still decided to shut down, Queen Street for subway construction. And I say to myself, I can't be the only person that thinks, don't screw up another part of the city until you finish with one section. Finish the Eglinton LRT first before you move on to another part of the city. So, it's amazing to me that they just don't see that. I'm like, it's so obvious. That's what most normal people would do with their work. Yeah. You finish with one project first, get that done. It should be an all hands on deck to make it work before you move on to the next one. Instead, the city is shut down in various streets, which is super annoying. Anyways, I digress. We were talking about DEI.
Yes, yes.
So, one of the other things I was going to say about DEI and diversity, equity, inclusion is that it's always out there. So, for example, I'm on Instagram and I'm scrolling through and I see a video that some top agent at one of the, central Toronto brokerages has posted. And it's basically a video for a cottage in Muskoka. But as I listen to the words of the song that he selected, it's and this and that and this and that. And I'm like, what are you doing? And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to say something. And so I went on to his Instagram and I commented and I said, I'm not sure why listening to the N-word multiple times is a good way to sell a cottage in Muskoka. I basically was like, I think you've made a really bad business decision. And so then I thought to myself, you know what, Devel? He might not see that comment. Why don't you email him? So I went and Google. He's a big agent. I know he's findable. I went and I sent him a direct email to say my displeasure about using the N-word multiple times. Crickets. What I have noticed is that I'm getting a lot of people liking the comment that I made on the Instagram. And so I'm like, okay, that's good that other people notice.
Right.
I've had a couple detractors, one person saying, oh, you should blame Tupac for that. And I'm like, yeah, we live in this universe where we have so much music to choose from.
Yeah.
You could choose another song. There's a million other songs to listen to that can also sell a Muskoka cottage that do not use the N-word.
Yeah.
Call me crazy. So I had a commentary like that. But for the most part, people have been supportive in terms of liking what I said, because it's like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
And
I always appreciate that, like in the work that we have done together, it's about noticing it, speaking up, right? Because that's really important, and acknowledging it and saying, okay, let's change that, right? And it's the desire and will of people. And we have to work, I think we each have an accountability. And I think even back to your comment about like people need to care a little bit about their neighbors. And it all comes full circle.
Yeah.
And it comes back to like, even when we talk about the work that we were doing on DEI, it's complex work because it's going to take a long time for people to have the courage to say, okay, hey, sorry, I'm going to change that.
Yeah.
Let me shift it up.
Absolutely.
And it's actually a disservice to their client, right? Because it's not the kind of positive press that you want. And it's just showing someone who's out of touch.
Absolutely, for sure.
I'm glad. I appreciate that you said that. And I can always count on you to always be like, I'm going to say the thing that's difficult here.
Yeah. And I think it's that you've got to become comfortable with the uncomfortableness of this, right? Because I think what people don't realize is that talking about racism is uncomfortable.
Yes.
And it's uncomfortable for everybody. It doesn't matter what you look like.
Yeah.
You find it an uncomfortable conversation to have. Yeah. And that's okay that we're all uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But the idea is like, let's get comfortable with the fact that we're all uncomfortable talking about it and just talk about it anyways, because it's something that needs to be said.
Yeah, no. And I think that is the work that we all have to do as, as realtors, as clients, as people. Okay, let's take this back to investments.
Yeah.
With regards to getting started, where, when you have worked with friends, and like, how do you, like, where do you even start, right? Because people are really concerned with how do you find a good match?
Yeah.
How do you protect sort of like your assets, right? And the things that you need to think about. What are some of those things?
Well, I mean, I think you really need to know your friends and know the people that you are working with, because, some personalities do not gel well when it comes to co-owning a property. And you really do need to think, okay, who am I working with? Is this actually going to work?
Yeah.
So you've got to choose and pick and choose and be smart enough to pick and choose, who are those people, because you really don't know how it's going to pan out. So that's number one. But number two, it's also about, and backtrack. It's also about what did that friend bring to the table?
Right.
So, in my case, in your case as well, we are self-employed.
Yes.
And so we don't have a T4. And when you go to a bank to get a mortgage, they love a T4. They love salaried people. They do not love self-employed people. So part of it is me knowing, okay, I'm great at selecting properties and finding those, but I'm self-employed. Let me partner up with some other people who are actually salaried, because then the bank will like our, what we have to offer much better.
As a package.
Yeah, as a package, then they will like me alone. So that's certainly something to start off with, is that how can these people help? With one of my properties in Prince Edward County, I had a friend who expressed interest in investing. And I was like, ooh, at the time he owned a contracting business. I was like, ooh, he's going to be a good partner, because he knows stuff that I don't know.
Yeah.
And so he has been an amazing partner. But you kind of really need to pick and choose, what skill set are you lacking that you need help with to get on board as your partner. And once you've got your partners on board, then it's about you speak with a lawyer and get a partnership agreement drawn up, right? So get that agreement drawn up that talks about what happens if somebody wants to sell. What happens if somebody dies? This is stuff that people really never think about or talk about. Again, I just talked about being uncomfortable. Like, we just got to talk about life the way it is, not the way we want it to be.
Absolutely.
And death happens. And so if one of my partners dies, I don't want to be in business with their heirs, because I picked my partnership based on my friend, not their family members.
Yeah.
So I don't want it. So I actually have written into all of my agreements, if you die, we are buying you out, simply because I don't want to be in business with your family.
Yep.
Just you.
No, that makes sense.
So that's one thing. But something else that, over time I start thinking about, and I'm like, you know what? I also don't want to be in business with somebody's spouse. What if they're getting divorced?
Yeah.
And so now I've got this agreement, and it's in there that basically says, if there's a spousal claim on this asset, i.e. you are going through a divorce and a spouse wants a portion of it, then you also will be bought out, because we don't want to deal with your spouse either.
Yeah. It's just clean.
Yeah, it's just clean. And I know that sounds really cutthroat, but man, again, you're picking your partners for a reason. You're not picking their spouses, you're not picking their kids, and you're not picking their parents.
Yeah.
You're picking them. And so that's why this is all about, you've got to protect yourself to make sure that, you are doing business with the people that you want to do business. So, we write down things in the agreement. How often are you going to use the property? Is it a strict investment, or are people going to use it as well? So for example, with my place in Barbados, because this was sort of my fifth investment property, I thought I do want to be able to use this a little bit. So we did put into the agreement, on this year, so-and-so uses it. The next year, the next partner uses it. The following year, the next partner uses it. And we're using it basically during, it would seem like the highest season possible in Barbados, which is over New Year's.
Oh, wow.
But you know what? Yes, we're giving up that revenue, but it's also so cool to be able to go down there with your friends for New Year's Eve and be like, yeah, just come to my house in Barbados for New Year's. And now we've done it a few times. I know the best way to do it. It's like, we just make dinner at home, hang out by the pool, we sit outside, and then we walk 5 minutes to the beach. We put out a blanket, and the most spectacular fireworks go off. because that's what they do on the beach in Barbados. So, it's really cool to be able to do something like that. But yes, it's in the agreement that, you get to use the house a certain amount of time.
Yeah. I love that. But I mean, that's just kind of being pragmatic and having the foresight to acknowledge what those needs are and to have that upfront conversation, which might be uncomfortable. Like, wait a minute, we got to think about what happens if you die. Wait a minute, we got to think about what's a fair allocation of usage and how does that impact revenue streams? I think that's the thing when you're doing investment and doing investment with partners and friends, the clarity.
Yes.
Of that. I mean, even in relationships, right?
Yeah,
like
of course.
I with family law lawyers, it's like, talk about what you're bringing to the table, So I think that that's really sound advice. And exit agreements. What happens if you don't want to be in this anymore?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also people, what they don't understand about working with friends or family members is you don't actually need to share your finances with each other. So, for people listening who are like, oh my God, I don't want to share my finances. It's like, don't worry about it. You don't have to. Everybody sends separate emails to that mortgage broker. Yeah. The mortgage broker will have all the information. It's never shared with each other.
Yes.
So we don't know each other's finances. We just know as a collective, this is how much of a mortgage we can pass for.
And then and that's a really important piece, right? Like that, even as realtors, when you're looking to buy a home, you send your information to your mortgage broker. Like, we don't need to get into your financial business. We need to know, can you afford this and can you afford the payments, right? And that's why you work with a professional that is an accountant or a mortgage person. How do you verify financial creditworthiness? Do you know what I mean? Like,
without knowing my partners?
Yeah, with your partners.
You know what? I guess I don't. I just rely on the mortgage broker or the bank to do their work. And I end up getting feedback based on how much of a mortgage they can get.
Right.
Right. So that sort of tells you what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Based on what the bank gives you as feedback. You're like, okay, I know I can do X by myself. So it needs to go up with other partners. And if it's not going up, I'm like, oh, they're a detriment.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah.
So you do get that kind of feedback that way, but I don't have a way of checking people out beforehand.
Yeah. But I guess I meant on your personal, when you're like, okay, this person will be a good fit. They have these assets that might be helpful. I mean, that's a part of funneling down, we're a good fit or we're not a good fit.
For sure. Sometimes you can, I guess you hope who of your friends actually has money. You know that some people don't have money, but some people also don't say because, discussing money and finances is such a poo-poo topic.
Well, that's the thing.
People don't talk about it. So yeah, you have to kind of figure that out. And it's really interesting to me about the finances because there's some communities out there that talk about money and there's other communities that don't. There's some people that are just completely in the dark. And so it's interesting with a lot of my friends now, a lot of us are real estate investors. I don't even know whether that's because of me or otherwise. I'm not sure, but
that you were the change.
Yeah, but somehow with a lot of my close friends, we're all real estate investors. So we're all talking, okay, how much are you going to charge for rent? Or someone's got a short-term rental. How much are you going to charge per night? So we're all talking and comparing notes because we can't get better if we don't share information with each other.
Yeah.
And it is about sharing information. So I think we have to get out of that world where discussing finances is so personal that people don't do it. And I mean, it's funny, even within my family, as mortgage rates have been increasing, I've thought, I really don't know anything about people's financial situations. And I'm not trying to know to judge. I'm more trying to know to understand what people are dealing with.
Yeah.
And if we go back to that humanity piece, right? So I sort of put it out with some of my family members. How many of you are on variable mortgages? Just to get back, what are you feeling right now? How are you doing? How are you really doing?
Yeah.
Not, hey, how are you? And so that was actually just really interesting, just putting it out to family members, and some people were like, yeah, I have a variable. It's brutal. Some people know I don't, but anyways, it was just interesting to hear, what are people's experiences? What's their hardship? What are they dealing with?
I think that's a really good point. talking about things educates you. It's not about a judgment piece, but it's also like, oh, wait a minute, I didn't think I could do that. Like, wow, you're doing that? I should try and consider that as an option. And to see that there is, it's like when we're comparing food. Oh, what did you like about that? You know, and it's important. Like, I know, like, even for myself, doing investment and talking to people, I'm like, you got to run the numbers. Like, you got to just make sure you did. And it's not a judgment thing. It's like, this is a practical thing.
Yeah,
like, if these numbers don't make sense, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Or if these numbers don't make sense, you can't upgrade your home.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
exactly.
how long can you hold something for? And it's having these tough conversations as opposed to just close my eyes and hope it works out. I'm like, no, that's not how it works.
Yeah, totally.
It's business.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. So I just think, we have to talk about money. I mean, if we look at our Canadian education system, we don't talk about money enough, right?
Yeah.
If we look at our high school education system, we're not teaching kids about credit card debt. We're not teaching them about mortgages. We're not teaching them about loans. And, out of everything that they're learning at school, they need to learn about those things. Because it's real life, it's practical, and you're going to need to use it in your life sometime. You might not use everything you learned from high school, but that is something that's, very practical, that it would be great if we would smarten up and get that into, our education system. And also kids need to know where their money's coming from. There was this case recently where there was some mom on TikTok, and she might've been American, I don't remember. Her child had come to her, who was 15, to say, I'd like to get a part-time job like my other friends. And that mom came back and said, no, you don't need to work. You've got the rest of your life to work. And I was like, you know what, Mom, you're not doing a good job, because I can tell you that, when I had corporate jobs in my 20s, the people who did not do well in the corporate world were all the people that never had to work as teenagers. And I see it all around with a lot of my friends who have kids. They feel like, oh, I have enough money. My kid doesn't need to work. And I'm like, no, they need to work because they need to learn. They need to learn what is it that they like, what is it that they don't like, and they need to learn the value of a dollar. And it can't just be about their parents coughing up, cash to buy them stuff. They need to know this stuff costs money. Like, I mean, I didn't grow up with a lot of money. Like, I remember, and this will date me for age perspective, but my mom was shopping for us at Byway.
Oh, yeah. I know. Yeah,
I don't know if, people out there even know what the hell that is, but it's like a Zellers or whatever, But like, I just remember as a little girl, I wanted Jordache and Sergio Valente jeans.
Yep.
And my mom wasn't having it. Like, we could not afford that kind of stuff, right? We're going to Byway to buy stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that was it. And so I remember starting to work when I was like 15. I had various jobs. I started off working in a car dealership as a greeter. So, customers would walk in, I'd find out what kind of car they wanted. And then I would, look on the sales list to see which salesperson was the next one up, and bring that, little piece of paper to that salesperson to say, okay, this is so-and-so. They were looking for this kind of car. Here you go.
Yeah.
But that was like one of my first jobs, which ironically enough was in sales, really.
Yeah.
Started my sales career.
Yeah.
But then I had some other really cool jobs. Well, first I was a waitress. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But I worked at Canada's Wonderland, and I was a character and an escort at Canada's Wonderland. So I would get dressed up as like Fred, Barney, and the Smurfs. And then I would also work as the escort, which was the person that walks around with the characters to make sure that kids don't beat them up. But, that was such a great job as a teenager to have, because we were 16, we were 17, we were living in Hanna-Barbera land.
Yes.
I don't even think it's called that now, but they gave us like this little apartment at the back of some store. And it was basically all of us hanging out in white jumpsuits, because that's what you had to wear in the costume.
Yeah.
And it was just, you'd work for half an hour and then you'd be on break for an hour.
It's hot in there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And if it was over 30 degrees, we'd only have to be in there for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But you got to know everybody in that group so well, because every single day we were there from like 10 in the morning till 7 at night. Yeah. And so that was such a great experience. Yes, I was making money, but I was making friends, and you're having new experiences, right? And then I became a waitress. Well, first I started off as a hostess. I was at Ginsberg and Wong. And when I turned 18, I was allowed to serve alcohol. So I rallied to, you need to promote me. I want to be a waitress. So I did that for a couple of years. And I feel like everybody needs to go out and be a waiter or waitress. This is like
service.
this is like one of those jobs that I feel like everybody needs to do it, because you've got to appreciate how hard it is to juggle everything, but you've got to appreciate working hard, because wait staff work hard. They are running all around and trying to remember all the different things that people say they want and need. And anyways, I just think it's such a great life experience for people to teach you about work and work ethic, that I feel like go work in a restaurant. This is the best training ground that everybody could get.
Yeah, it is so on point. And because it is one of the things that I've often thought about, successful people, what makes you successful? What are those experiences that lead you that way?
Mm-hmm.
And the common answer has been get as much experience working in different fields, different sectors, and just work, because it exposes you to what you like, what you don't like,
exactly,
how the world works, how people are.
Mm-hmm.
So I really appreciate that. And I love the fact that you told me that you work at Canada's Wonderland, because I also worked at Canada's Wonderland.
Get out. What'd you do?
So when people would come to Canada's Wonderland, you would take a photo and it'd be the keychain photos.
Oh, yeah.
So it was really fun. And hanging, where you would go and get your breaks, getting funnel cake and meeting all the characters.
Yeah.
As an usher or whatever, like, I got to meet people. So that's why I'm like, you guys look like you had fun.
We did. It was such a fun thing to be a part of. And it's interesting now on Facebook, because a couple of us are still friends on Facebook. So it's interesting to see, it's like, okay, we've all grown up together, and just to see where people are at. And I mean, I know that there's lots of people that hate social media out there, but one of the things I think is super cool is being able to stay connected to people you were in public school with or high school with. Like, it's like, you can't replace knowing somebody for like 30, 40 years.
No.
Like, that's huge, right?
Yeah.
It's great that you've got lots of new friends, but that experience of having old friends, I think, is really cool.
No, absolutely. And you learn so much from it. It's like, that experience that we shared, how was that formative?
Mm-hmm.
Like to where it led to us, like in sales, how that landed you there, and the experience of, I love that. I really appreciate that, your sharing of that, because it's such humble, real beginnings. It's like, no, it's not glamour. It's just experience.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And I would also add to that, for kids who are in high school and university, it's all those extracurricular activities as well too, do help round and shape you. I remember in, high school, I was like an advertising manager for, a book that we had. And then I ran the high school fashion show.
Yeah.
And so, and you're looking for sponsors for the fashion show. And then I remember I went to university. I did a BCom in management policy and finance at McGill. And so I was like an ad manager there, and we're looking for advertising. And then I remember, I got my BCom and I was like, okay, I'm going to go work in finance. And so I get a job working at Burns Fry. That also dates me for people out there. And working for a couple of brokers as a sales assistant. And I was trying to get into working in investment banking. And I was like, I couldn't do it. Every time I'd, try to get my foot in the door, for some reason, something wouldn't work out. And I remember reading the Financial Post newspaper and seeing, they were talking about the Toronto International Film Festival and how they went about looking for corporate sponsors. And I thought, whoa, that's kind of cool. I didn't realize that people could get paid to do that as a job. And, all the bells go off in my head going, wait a second, this is the kind of stuff I did in my extracurricular activities at university and high school. I'm going to track those people down and see if I can get a job.
Yeah.
So I was persistent, tracking people down. And then eventually I get an interview, and they need to hire people. They needed to hire a development assistant. So, bottom rung, working in the sponsorship department for TIFF. And I got the job. And so I did that full time for 4 years. And worked my way up within that department. And so it was like, hey, this is kind of really cool, And so I think it's also, you got to get out there and try stuff, because you just never know. And you also don't need to be so stuck in the mud that you think, okay, I've got to be with this company forever.
Yeah.
Like my mom, I think a lot of people's parents, my mom worked she worked at a bank for like over 30 years. And that was just not going to be me. Yeah. I'm always going to be like, okay, what interests me now? If I'm not getting promoted or I'm not doing something different, I get bored.
We're
really
so
fast.
Similar that way. I think that's why we have such great conversations. And
you get bored and you're like, okay, what am I doing next?
Yeah.
How am I learning more? And so eventually, left TIFF, but eventually started working for Chorus Entertainment in advertising sales for the W Network. And I did that for like 10 years. And that was great because it was always different. You're always working with different advertisers and you're always trying to come up with new and different ideas. And you're pitching new ideas all the time about how you can do stuff with an advertiser. So that really helped shape me. And during that time, I started buying real estate and owning real estate. And then eventually what I realized is that, they keep laying sales staff off here. I'm going to get laid off eventually. I better figure out what I'm going to do next with my life because it's not this.
Right.
And I knew that from working in TV ad sales, I could go into digital ad sales, but I was like, that doesn't excite me. I don't care about it.
Yeah.
What else do I like doing? And sometimes you try things and you figure out, okay, maybe this doesn't work. And then I sort of went back to real estate and I thought, you know what? I've been doing this on the side the whole time. Let me work and get my real estate license. And so I went out, I started working on getting my real estate license on the side. And then voila, I get laid off. And I was like, okay, this is like, it's almost like I had it planned out. Literally lost my job on Wednesday, Friday, signed my contract with Bosley Real Estate. And I've been doing this for 11 years now and I've kind of really never looked back. But I think for a lot of people, it's about, you just got to read the signs out there about what's going on in your world and your life and society and the universe to figure out where should you be, what makes your heart happy, what do you like doing, what makes you excited. And so for me, continuing with real estate, I like that the fact that I can put my fingers in all these different things, right? Yeah. So I like that I can be an investor. I like that I can run an association in Prince Edward County for other people like myself. I like that I can go speak at council. I've got the mayor of Prince Edward County literally on my phone that I can text when I have a question. Like I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's great just to be able to just spread your wings and get out there and say, hey, if this is something that interests me, I'm just going to go do it.
Yeah.
Because I can.
And I just thank you so much for sharing that, because I think a lot of times when people think about what does success look like, it doesn't materialize overnight.
Yeah.
It's multiple stages. And it's also checking in with yourself about what matters to me, what's going to keep my interest, and how do I build on that? And so everything that, you're always very like pragmatic. You're always like, let's look at the context of this and follow the breadcrumbs, right? Like, let's not just get stuck on that one line.
Yeah.
Like, let's delve. Let's be curious. Let's ask a few more questions and see where that leads. And I think that curiosity, that inquisitiveness and openness to kind of really stir things up and have uncomfortable conversations keeps you on your toes, keeps us pushing.
Yeah.
Right. And I really appreciate that story, because I think so many people can learn from that in a challenging moment of like being let go, but you're like, yeah, I saw that coming.
Yeah.
It was inevitable. And I want to do something I care about.
Yeah.
And I see, when we're in meetings together, when we work together, that we all bring passion to the table, and I love that. And 11 years later, right? Like, you've gone from local to Prince Edward County to global.
Yeah, totally.
Right. And
absolutely.
it's possible. And it's about leveraging everything, a little bit. And so I think I appreciate that experience and the sharing of that. And, I always appreciate our conversations.
Yes, me too. Absolutely. They're great.
I wanted to kind of like talk about, I always love talking about quotes, like to wrap up with quotes and everything. And I love this quote, which is so like insightful, right? When people show you who they are, believe them. By Maya Angelou. Tell me about that quote.
Yeah. It's one of those things where I always believe that actions speak louder than words, and we really do have to listen. I'm going to say, especially as women, when you're dating, that, when you're dating somebody and that person speaks to you to say, hey, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to take it this further, you don't think that person's going to change. You need to meet that person where they're at.
Yeah.
Versus thinking, oh, I can just change them. They'll change their mind. When really, no, they're telling you what they want. So you really need to believe them. And so sometimes too, I think with friendships as well, We need to look and see, okay, if our friends are treating us a certain way, again, actions speak louder than words. And it's that when people show you who they are, believe them. It's sometimes I think I'm, reading on Facebook or whatever discussion groups and someone's talking about a cheating spouse, and I think they showed you who they were.
Yeah.
And you need to believe them. You can't think that that's going to change. And maybe I'm just one of those people that thinks once a cheater, always a cheater. Don't judge me.
No judgment. Yeah.
But I think that again, when people show you who they are, you literally need to believe them because they might not be able to verbalize who they are, but they're showing you through their actions. And you need to see that that's who they are.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that. Like you have shared so much about, the challenges that you've had to overcome and how you prepared for them and how to build a successful portfolio. And it's one step at a time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It is. It's one step at a time. It's sort of like, how does somebody eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Exactly.
Right? You can't get caught up and stressed out about, oh my God, I can't do this. It's such a big thing. You just got to start. Yeah. And you have to start somewhere.
Well, thank you, Devel.
Thanks for having me, Lee.
Appreciate it.
Cool.
I love our conversation.